we get a lot of questions about what metabolism is, and generally when we get this question, people think a lot about, well, metabolism is something that's like we see, or like is a part of our system. What is it? So can you define what metabolism is, and how would you probably explain it in a very practical way?
Yeah, so the textbook definition is for metabolism is it's the sum of all the chemical reactions that take place in your body, essentially to keep you alive. And there's a lot of reactions. I mean, cellular reactions, there's glycolysis, there's lipolysis, there's protein metabolism. In my purview of, let's say, physique enhancement, we kind of have a very specific view of metabolism in terms of calories. So that is my interest in this broad concept of metabolism. And the way that I would describe that is how many calories does it take to sustain your life? And that would be like your caloric output. And then how many calories do we take in, which may lead to fat gain or to muscle gain if the correct stimulus is there, or to fat loss. So I'm more focused on the calorie side of the umbrella term of metabolism.
Okay, understand. So we know that there are calories in and calories out, and this equation tends to be very simplistic, but at the same time it's very complex. How would you say that? Would you say that one area of the equation affects the other and vice versa?
Yes, yeah, there's no question. And I'll give this example. I test a lot of metabolisms, metabolic rates, resting metabolic rates to be specific, thousands and thousands in my career. I always say there's not many people on this planet that have done more resting metabolic rate assessments than me. I've done them for nearly 17 years, sometimes up to 10 per day. So I've, thousands of these tests. When I see somebody, particularly a female, who has a high metabolism, and it's rare, most people have a normal metabolism, but when I see somebody with a fast metabolism, there's two things that are always the common answer, the common denominator. One is they exercise nearly every day, and that means resistance exercise and aerobic exercise. The other is they eat a ton of food. In fact, there's research that reports that the number one predictor for metabolic rate in females is caloric intake. In males, it's muscle mass. In females, it's how much food they're actually eating. So clearly the amount of food you eat has an impact on your metabolism. And we can also look at that, just what happens if you eat a lot of food. Well, if you gain weight, it starts to slow down. So the food indirectly impacts your body composition, which directly impacts your metabolic rate. So I don't think you can separate calories in and its impact on metabolism.
And the opposite way can happen too. Like if we have hyperthyroidism, or like we have leptin hormones, when they go up or down, they can regulate our appetite, and then that can lead us to eat more or eat less, or like those sort of things. So like the other part of the equation can also affect intake, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And if clearly the thyroid hormones, T4, T3, have a huge impact on metabolism. Leptin as well. We'll talk, I think we're going to get to leptin when we talk about some of the research that I've done. Leptin is, I don't know if we have a full picture of leptin yet. We have ideas, but I'm more hesitant to discuss leptin and what I think I know than I was a year ago. But we'll see. And there's more and more research coming out, and in lean people, which is where, and I think I need to say that early on. My population is not obese individuals. My research lab exists to help people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. And the types of subjects that I study are fit people who want to get leaner. So they're not obese, they're not overweight. Some of them are bodybuilders, but most of them are people who just want to look like a bodybuilder without actually stepping on a bodybuilding stage.
So let's get into another question. And I think this one is going to talk a little bit about leptin. And this is about metabolic adaptation. Let's assume that our audience already knows what metabolic adaptation is. Let's get into more on a deeper end. And what would be, like, when it comes to metabolic adaptation, why would be that leptin seems to be thought to be one of the most influential hormones in terms of like reduction in energy expenditure or increase in appetite or defining basal metabolic rate?
Yeah, so the one thing we know about leptin is if you reduce calories and if there's a fat reduction or if there's fat reduction, leptin levels go down. Or when we lose fat, leptin levels go down. Leptin, if it's low, makes us have more hunger. If leptin levels are higher, we tend not to feel as hungry. So we want leptin levels to be high. And what we know from published research is if you lose weight, leptin levels go down. If you look at the bodybuilding case studies, and these are, the leanest people on the planet are bodybuilders, their leptin levels are very, very suppressed, very low. And if you look at their hunger profiles, it's very, very high. Something that's made me question a lot of this with fat loss lately is that there's research to suggest if you just cut your calories pretty severely for a couple days, leptin levels go down significantly. And it's not like you're losing a ton of fat in 3 days. You might be losing a little bit. So I think it's more, leptin is also receptive to a caloric deficit and not just fat loss. Because I've seen multiple studies report this now. And let me also say, we don't have much data in lean people. What we have is as they lose a lot of weight and fat, leptin levels get suppressed.
What hormones do you think get most impacted and play the biggest roles when thinking in trying to reverse this adaptation in the first place?
Yes, the hormones that we know get affected, particularly lean people as they get leaner. We know T4 and T3, the thyroid hormones, they go lower. We know leptin goes lower. Cortisol, in some of the case studies in bodybuilders, that gets elevated. Testosterone levels get suppressed in males. And sometimes that just tanks in some males. So those are the primary hormones that we know that impact metabolic, or that are at least associated with metabolic adaptation. Now, I'm hesitant to say that it's because of the hormones that we're having this. It may be that we have cut our calories and the calories is driving everything. So the one thing we know that improves metabolic adaptation is an increase in calories. That's the premise for refeeds and for diet breaks. And again, we don't have a lot of data in lean people. So I look at the energy imbalance as the primary driver, and the hormones are responding to that. It's not the hormones first. And we said something, and I want to comment on something else. Yes, metabolic adaptation is natural. And I don't know, as far as fearing it, I still want to do everything I can to prevent it. So that's kind of what drives me. I don't want your metabolism, even if it's supposed to go down, I don't want it to go down. And we have strategies that can prevent it from going down. That my lab has, the last 2 studies we've done, we've lost significant amounts of fat in these subjects, and we have not had a metabolic rate decrease at all. Okay.
So when you say that, when you refer to metabolic adaptation, do you always refer only to an adaptive metabolic rate that has gone down as you lose weight? But if you lose weight, do you feel like is there something else that gets affected? Like, for example, when you lose weight, obviously you weigh less, and for that reason, your metabolic rate might adapt to be a little bit slower, obviously because you weigh less. But at the same time, are there other things that you consider that could be impacted as you lose weight that might trigger some of these adaptations that probably might not be completely avoided? You can't avoid it completely, but you sort of can mitigate them in some way.
Yeah, so it's the other driver of some of this stuff is the loss of muscle mass as well. So it's, maybe it's not just a caloric deficit. It's a caloric deficit coupled with a loss of muscle mass. I still find it important. Let's do everything we can to prevent the loss of metabolic rate. Let's prevent the loss of muscle mass. And there are strategies. And again, I go back to refeeds and diet breaks. In theory, that's what they're supposed to prevent. There's even some dietary supplements, which I don't think have much research, but in theory, that try to keep cortisol from getting elevated. That may help with some of this metabolic adaptation that occurs as well.
Now, in your opinion, do you feel like utilizing diet breaks have changed over the course of the time you have been studying diet breaks? I think you mentioned that this new data you have coming up from a recent study you run. So tell us a little bit about that and whether that has changed your perspective or your conclusions and applications of diet breaks into your practice.
Yeah, so let's define diet breaks as the way that my lab defined it. So a diet break is taking at least 1 week or 7 days off from your diet. Sometimes it's up to 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks, but it's a clear break from your diet. So we'll start with that definition of a diet break. And there's not a lot of research on diet breaks. I'm aware of, a handful of studies. Sometimes the diet break literature, and it's always in obese people. Every study except for, I believe, the one that we just completed, it's always in overweight or obese individuals. But the literature would suggest sometimes it works. Sometimes it helps us lose more fat, or what we call weight loss or fat loss efficiency, so that after you come off of the diet break, your body actually loses more fat in that next period of time, that next week or two. Sometimes the research says it's not effective, but it's never harmful. So we have to remember that. A diet break, based on my reading of this literature, which is not massive, there's not a lot of studies, it's never harmful, and sometimes it's helpful. When it's helpful, it's important to say that when you take the break, you have to bring your calories back up to maintenance levels, or maybe even a little bit of a surplus. A lot of people, when they do this, they don't go all in. They increase their calories a little bit, but they're still in a caloric deficit. And it seems like that shortchanges any potential results. So what we found in my study, and we published this, we presented this data at the International Society of Sports Nutrition conference this summer. And I need to give credit to my research coordinator at that time, Madeline Seidler, she did a tremendous job leading this study. What we found was that in resistance trained females who did a 1 week diet break, so they dieted 2 weeks, took a break, dieted 2 more weeks, took a break, and then they dieted for another 2 weeks, so 6 weeks, compared to a group that didn't take any diet breaks, there was no difference in body composition. They didn't lose more fat. They didn't retain more muscle. It was equal. And you can look at that one of two ways. You can say, oh, well, diet breaks don't work, I'm not going to do them. Or you can look at it in the context that they allow you to take a break from your diet and you didn't gain any weight. The amount of weight gain that they had during the diet break was like a half a kg, a pound, or a quarter of a pound, quarter of a kg, half a pound. It was almost trivial. So a lot of people have worries. Oh, I'm going to gain all my weight back. Not in our research. And again, we didn't publish this yet, but we will publish this in 2021. So that's very important. And I would say the context of this is, for my population of people living normal lives but trying to live it lean, if you go on vacation, take a diet break. Don't kill yourself and diet. Enjoy your life. Try to have a good physique, but when you need and want to take a break, take it, and do it with confidence that you're not going to do damage to the progress that you made.
And I think I would say that probably we need to clarify to say that it's very important that when you go in a diet break, you sort of need to respect that it's not a free for all, or you can just go and binge, because that can lead to weight gain, especially if you're very lean. So are there certain rules you should follow when in a diet break that you should sort of be aware of and be mindful that if you sort of go too crazy, that can really harm your progress?
Yes, and I'm seeing some of the questions. It is not a free-for-all. It's not a food orgy for that week. What we did in our study was we took 2 weeks before the study started, and we calculated their maintenance calories. And we did that by having them track their calories, and they had to weigh themselves every day. So we knew what their maintenance calories were at the beginning of the study, and that was their limit during the diet breaks. They were, you know, if their metabolism slowed down a little bit during their diet, then maybe they were eating in a little bit of a surplus by going back to their maintenance levels. But it's clearly, you've got to be out of the deficit, but it cannot be unrestricted, what some people call like a cheat day, or a cheat week in that case.
Exactly.
Yes.
So for some people that are worried to going into a diet break, should you expect some weight gain or fat gain in this diet break? If we define the difference between weight gain and fat gain, potentially there's a little bit of a difference. What would you say about that?
So I'll answer that globally and then specifically. In our study in resistance trained females, there was no difference in the amount of fat lost and the amount of weight lost in the group that took diet breaks at the end of the study. Now, it took them 2 weeks longer because they had 2 diet breaks. So that's a given. It took them longer to do the study. But they didn't gain any weight at the end of the study. Now, during the diet breaks, and this is what's really cool, we had them weigh themselves every day, and we took an average of how much weight they gained. And it was about, I don't remember the exact number, but it was about a half a kilogram of weight gain during that week. Now, individually, some of these female subjects gained more. Some subjects actually lost weight. So it was about half gained weight, about half lost weight. And overall, it was, like I said, an average of about half of a kg of weight gain during the diet break week.
What would you attribute to the weight gain? Not necessarily fat gain, but what would you attribute that to?
Well, some of it could be a retention of body water. Some of it could be maybe they overate, even though, we were asked them not to. And another thing is we control for protein in all of my research. So they had to eat 1.8 grams per kg of protein. And that was also during the diet break week as well. But it's hard for me to say that they gained weight when it was an average of a half a kg. That wasn't significant. So statistically speaking, there was no weight gain. Half the time they lost body weight. And again, we didn't have any valid measures of body composition to say how much was fat or how much was muscle. But with that small of a change, we wouldn't have been able to detect that anyway. I think the more appropriate interpretation is there was no harm done after that study, after the 8-week intervention or after the 6-week diet with the 2 weeks of diet breaks. If you're going on vacation or you want to take a break from a longer term diet and you continue to resistance train and your protein is high, you can do it with what will soon be published scientific evidence to support. You're not going to gain a lot of weight if you don't go crazy with food intake.
Okay. I get a lot of questions as well when you go into a diet break and you say, well, if you're taking a vacation, you're just going for a little bit of a holiday, should you be tracking, because of the part of your sort of diet break or going away is sort of a stop tracking or just having a break from the diet? So what would be your recommendations when someone is say, well, it's going to be hard to track, I really want to sort of have a good break? Would you just sort of tell them, well, just be mindful about your portion sizes, or what would you say?
I would say something that nobody wants to hear, and that is in my study, they tracked that week. So I'm gonna have to say, if you're going to mimic what we did, you would have to track. Now, I would also ask for a little bit of common sense. If you're not a professional physique athlete, what if you do gain a pound or two of fat because you didn't track? Is that the end of the world? Is the world going to end because you enjoyed? I would say no. But if you want to be very sure that you're not going to gain weight, I would say that, again, nobody wants to hear it. You should track. A lot of people, though, I'm not one of them, but a lot of people are very good at intuitive eating. They can do this, and they probably know who they are. I know when I look in the mirror, if I don't track, I lose my discipline. For whatever it is, I need to track.
Okay. So what you're saying is generally you recommend for someone to be tracking if they actually want to achieve objective results. But otherwise, if there's something like if you're not in a rush or you don't have a specific deadline to be lean for, then you sort of can go a little bit more looser about it. And if you gain a little bit of weight, that's fine, as long as you get back on track. And obviously you get some mindfulness into it. Like it's not a binge week or anything like that. But if you don't track, you sort of can get there, maybe a little bit overweight, maybe just gaining a little bit of weight, but not necessarily messing up all your progress. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. And again, let's go back to kind of my lab's mission. It's to help people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. If you don't want to track all the time, don't track all the time. What you can do is live your life and not track, and then appreciate, okay, now I've gained some weight. I need to take the next month and embrace a caloric deficit, probably track, and then I can lose this fat. I see nothing wrong with that. Now, again, that's the population I serve. If there's, obviously, most of the world doesn't care about their physique, at least not to the extent that they're going to track. Great. That's a great place to be. But for the people who are focused on this, chill out and then go on a diet. If that works for you over the long term, I think that's awesome. Again, I want to help people do this in a way where they can feel good within their normal lifestyle. It is, I'm not going to sit here and say that tracking is not obsessive. It is. It's an obsessive thing. And the goal is to get everybody to where they just know, where it's intuitive for them.
That's a very important point. And I think there are a lot of people that will go and say, well, you can't track forever. And some people want to say, well, I feel good if like tracking for me is like a bit habitual, it's normal, it's just part of my life, it's not obsessive. It sort of keeps me informed. It's like checking your bank account when you do purchases and you check at the end of the day and at the end of the week how much you have spent, how much you earn, and you're sort of keeping in check on what are you doing, and it's an objective measure. Versus like if you're intuitive, like, oh, well, I just check my bank account once a year and I see what happens with it. So it's something like that. I guess, is that an analogy that you could say could reflect what you're explaining about?
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. Now, I also need to appreciate, I mean, you're the trained nutritionist and you have training in psychology. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a physiologist, and I will give you data on, if you do this in my research, this is the result. I don't want to say I don't care about the psychology. I'm just saying I don't study it. It's not here's the data, here's the caloric deficit, here's what we report. It's kind of a blunt object. So I appreciate the psychology of the tracking, taking a break, or what you said, maybe just check once a year. But it's just not something that my research team focuses on. There are other people that focus on that, and that's a good balance. If you want what actually happens to your body, look at my research. If you want to know how it affects the mind, which is just as important, you're not gonna adhere to a diet without the correct psychology. you need to also look at that.
Yep, that's great. So going back to a diet break, how do you actually plan for it? So when it comes to program a diet break, what are some of the fundamentals or principles you utilize to program a diet break within a diet phase?
That's a good question. So some of the other data that some of the other literature I was reading is, and this is important, when subjects in diet break studies, when it's been successful, it was a prescribed or planned diet break in the research. And I'm gonna shift and talk about how I would do it in the real world. But what seems to not be effective is if somebody's on a diet and they fail, they overeat, but they weren't planning to, they just did. And then they say, well, I'll just take a couple more days off and we'll call it a diet break. That doesn't seem to be effective. Where it has been effective, it was planned. They knew on this day for this week or these 2 weeks, there will be a diet break. And there was no sense of guilt because it was part of the plan. Now, and I don't work with clients right now, but when I did work with clients, what I did was say, we will plan a diet break. And again, I also need to make this statement. If you're working with somebody who's a bodybuilder, bikini competitor, and they have to step on stage on a certain date, you might not have the luxury of doing a diet break. So in a general population, what I would do is if we have 2 consecutive weeks where there is no progress, that's when our approach would be a diet break. So let's take an approach. So it's planned. We might not know what day, but we know if there's 2 consecutive weeks of fat not coming off while we're in a caloric deficit, that's going to be a strategy that we'll try potentially before we drop calories again.
Okay. And would you consider to implement a refeed versus a diet break? What would be your sort of approach in saying, well, this is worth a refeed only and not necessarily a diet break, or how a diet break would be superior in this case for this client over a refeed?
Yeah, I'll talk about my own life because that, I kind of do my research for myself. Like I know, what do I want to do? What do I want to try, have my wife try, and then we'll design a study around that to some extent. I do both. I typically will increase my food on the weekends, which we would call a refeed. It's not a week, it's only 2 days. And we increase carbs. And I diet Monday through Friday. And again, what's the philosophy here? I'm doing things that will work with me in my normal lifestyle. I tend to eat more food on the weekends naturally. So I'm going to design my diet around my lifestyle. I'll adhere better, and it won't be such a drag on my life. So every weekend, increase my calories. And then if I'm going for a period of time where I'm not dropping fat, if I'm trying to drop fat, I'm going to take a week off from a diet break. So if you look at just my graphs, they're very jagged in terms of increasing calories. But it's always according to some type of plan based on how my body is responding. So I would almost say that the biofeedback of my fat loss is dictating when I'm taking a diet break. So
when you talk about, now let's talk a little bit about inclusive and exclusive dieting, because I think that's part of what you do a lot and reflect about. When you talk about inclusive and exclusive dieting, and what are the effects on body composition, and like what would be your message and your main takeaway between doing an approach that is inclusive versus an approach that is completely exclusive in terms of dieting?
Yeah, so I'm glad we're talking about this. My lab also completed a flexible dieting study. I believe it's the first flexible dieting study ever done in resistance trained people. And I want to give credit to Lauren Conlin, who's a really good coach. She designed the study, coordinated this study, and this was several years ago, and we just are now submitting it for publication. And what we did in this study, we had one group of, and this was males and females, of resistance trained people. One of them went on a flexible diet, so we decreased their calories by 25%, and we gave them their macros, and they had to eat 2 grams per kg of protein. And this was a 10-week diet period. The other group, we gave them a meal plan, and it was pretty rigid. They could choose like between lean meat, chicken, or fish as like a protein exchange. So very little options in this meal plan. But the flexible dieting group, we said, eat whatever you want, just hit your macros. And what we found at the end of the 10 weeks, they were equivalent. No significant differences in fat loss. They both retained muscle mass fairly well. Metabolic rate was similar in both groups. So what we found in that study was flexible dieting is no better or no worse than a rigid diet. And these were not bodybuilders that, were at a 30, 40, 50% caloric reduction. Once you get that low, I don't think flexible dieting even exists at that point, because you're going to have to, your food selection when you are lowering your calories to that level, it's very limited.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you're spot on saying that, well, flexible dieting is another tool that can help a lot of people, especially when it comes to sort of decide what fits into your lifestyle, your preferences. And I guess some people, especially those that are very beginners, that they have no idea what flexible dieting means or what to do with appropriate food selections. They probably have a very poor dietary background. Perhaps if you tell them to just go and do a flexible dieting approach, they might just keep eating poor diets, and they might perhaps benefit from having some kind of a structure at the beginning. Tell them what to do, what is better for their health, a little bit of education and awareness, and then transition to a more flexible approach where they already have an idea what they should be, the bulk part of their diet should be, like the 80% of the diet being whole foods, and like continuing to look at a structured meal, like meal timing, or like not necessarily meal timing, but like not having an erratic eating, like every day they eat whatever at some point in the day, but rather just having more of a structured day. So do you think that would be something that you would consider when it comes to approaching someone who's a beginner who wants to get lean, but not necessarily a bodybuilder, but they're coming from a background of poor dietary habits? Perhaps they would benefit from starting on a meal plan, just giving some structure, some education, and then moving a little bit more towards the flexible approach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, which is why I love you as a nutrition professional. You obviously probably do that. I think that's very wise to just tell somebody, here's your macros, knock yourself out. Man, that's very overwhelming, and it's probably going to cause a lot of anxiety. I think what you said, and again, I would defer to you as the nutrition professional. Here's a plan. Choose some of these foods, and then start to just learn, okay, I'm eating oatmeal all the time. Oh, well, maybe I'd rather have rice than oatmeal. So I think that is great. Now, let me say, though, in my research studies, we only do flexible dieting. We have a large investment into the educational component of teaching people all of the skills needed. And it is a skill. Flexible dieting is a learned skill. Yeah.
So would you say, is there a difference between flexible dieting and perhaps if it fits your macros? Because like if it fits your macros, it's sort of kind of a flexible dieting, but I don't think it has a really good structure in the sense of choosing the right foods, or what is actually going to be healthy over the long term.
Yeah, I'm just going to say the perception, when I hear if it fits your macros, my mind goes to more what we would call junk food and not caring anything about micronutrients or food quality. And flexible dieting has a little bit more of a healthy connotation. Now, that's in my mind. But I think that's probably a common perception of the two. They could be the same thing, but if it fits your macros, tends to be not as healthy. or not as nutrient dense foods, I guess is the better way to phrase that.
Yeah, that's right. Now, do you believe fat loss supplements have an effect on resting metabolic rate? And this is a question we probably get a lot.
Yes, there's no doubt, especially if there's caffeine in these fat loss supplements, or what I usually refer to them as a thermogenic supplement. If you take a thermogenic supplement, particularly if it has caffeine, 150 to 350 milligrams, it's going to increase your metabolic rate. The question, though, is just because it increases your metabolic rate, does that mean you're going to lose fat? Now, that's a different question. My lab is about to do a study, which is, I'm really excited about it. We're doing a study with Legion Athletics. We're looking at their supplement called Phoenix, and it's a non-caffeinated product. And I don't know if I've ever seen research on a non-caffeinated thermogenic supplement. So this will be at least in my mind, the first one that we're going to do. Now, unfortunately, we're not measuring if they're actually losing fat. So that's the more important question. I'll say that my concern with the general population about these types of supplements is a lot of people, that's where they go first. They go, oh, I want to lose weight. What supplement can I take? And I don't like that. It's not the preferred approach. I think the focus first is on my nutrition. What's my maintenance calories? Let me reduce them. Let me be disciplined in that. Let me increase my skill of eating in a deficit. What's my exercise? I think resistance training is the best thing for long-term fat loss. What is my training? And then if you need an additional tool, I think that may be the appropriate time. Now, I'll say personally, I don't like taking them. I like it just being my food and my exercise. Now, when I used to bodybuild, I took them. But in my normal everyday lifestyle, I do not take them in my everyday lifestyle.
Okay. So do you think, and this is a question that we also get a lot, and once someone has achieved the weight after being in a diet for 8-12 weeks or so, and they achieve the new body fat targets, what are some of the strategies to actually ensure they don't go back to what they were before? Because, like, how can you be one of the 5%ers? Because we hear a lot these sort of statistics that 95% of people who diet go back and regain all the way back. So how can we actually be the part of that 5%ers who not just lose the weight, but can actually keep it off for the rest of their lives or long term?
I think the answer to that is the solution to that is asking yourself or reflecting on what did you do in those 12 weeks to get to your current weight. If you lost a massive amount of weight in 12 weeks, so I think we're defining they lost weight over 12 weeks. If they were on a crash diet for 12 weeks and they were running 5 miles every day and they were avoiding every possible temptation for all 12 weeks, they arrive at a physique that they're like, yes, this is what I wanted. They're not going to maintain that. What they did for those 12 weeks is not maintainable for their lifestyle. If, on the other hand, they took a slow approach, and I usually say no more than 1% of a body weight loss per week, if they engaged in resistance training, if their protein intake was high, if they were not in a hurry, they've developed skills that have become part of their lifestyle. And now they can look back and say, yeah, I can maintain what I've been doing. This was not a drastic change to my normal lifestyle. I have a lot more confidence in that person maintaining it. So I guess a good way to ask is, when I'm losing my fat, is what I'm doing now something I can see myself doing in 3 months, 6 months, 2 years? And people lie to, and I lie to myself as well. I'm like, oh, I can keep doing cardio 6 days per week. I hate cardio. I do it, but I'm not going to do it 6 days per week. I lie to myself when I say I am.
Okay, so it is all about sustainability, self-monitoring, a little bit of self-restraint, I suppose, because obviously if you were eating 4,000 calories before and now you sort of need to adjust to a more moderate approach and more moderate eating, you sort of need to be aware of what are your sort of weaknesses and your triggers, and you sort of need to be aware of those things to sort of manage cravings or wanting to go sometimes and eat everything you want. It's something that you have a desire at the back of your head, but you sort of know, well, what are my goals? What do I need to do to stay this lean? It doesn't mean you can have every now and then some sort of happy days or like, but always sort of being in the mindset that it's not something that you can do consistently every single day.
Yeah. Again, you're taking it. I love your expertise on this. The triggers, being aware of where you may fail, very important.
I really want to conclude this live. Just we're approaching to the hour, so I'm mindful of your time. There's one more question, and I think this is worth talking about, and it's about future research you are looking into exploring in the next couple of months, next year.
Yeah, so right now my lab is focused on rapid fat loss, and that seems like it goes against what I said earlier. I don't think that people should crash diet or try to lose fat quickly. It should be part of a long-term plan, part of your lifestyle. That being said, what we're looking at is the question that I want to answer is, what's the most amount of fat that we can take off the human body as quickly as possible while maintaining muscle mass and metabolism and a healthy hormonal profile? That's what I want to do. So we want to be aggressive to the point where we're doing no damage. So what are those boundaries? What is that caloric deficit? How much training is that? How much cardio is that? How much do fat loss supplements help? That's where my lab is. We just finished data collection last week on our first rapid fat loss. Well, yeah, you were a part of that. You helped determine the direction of what we looked at for that study. So we finally finished that, and we didn't analyze the results yet, but that's where we're going. And then another study we're doing is in females who are not resistance trained. How much does just increasing protein help? What if the only thing you do is start resistance training and increase protein, does that improve your physique? So we're going to answer that question in another study. And I need to give credit to my research coordinator now, Gianna Mastrofini. She's coordinating that study. And that would be the largest study we've ever done.
In that study, though, did you mention that are they going to go in a calorie deficit or just take protein and resistance train without going into a calorie deficit?
But no, in the study that we're doing, there is no caloric deficit. It's going to be a caloric surplus. At least that's what we're anticipating. We're not giving them a diet. We're saying, hey, actually, we're going to have two groups. We're going to say, one group, what are your normal foods that are higher in protein? We want you to double them. Do you normally eat 2 eggs for breakfast? Go to 4. Do you have chicken salad for lunch? Double the chicken. The other group, we're going to say, we want you to hit, this will be a tracking group. We are telling you to hit 2.2 grams per kg of protein. You have to hit that amount. And for that group, we're giving supplements, protein bars. So I need to thank Dymatize Nutrition. They've donated protein for that study. Legion Athletics has donated some protein bars for that study. And then we have a control group where we're saying, change nothing. Just do this resistance training program. And what we're asking is, if you do nothing else but just increase protein, does that improve your physique? Because if it does, that's a much easier first step than trying to, give people, macros to track for everything. That's a bigger first step to take. So we're trying to do minimal changes.
That's amazing. And I think this is so important to sort of look, what is the simple thing we can start you with, and then get you, like, use that strategy until you get no longer progress with that strategy, so we can implement other strategies. So it's like trying to find simple ways that people can adhere to that are not as like huge, that they don't imply so much changes and such a drastic, like sort of disruptive when it comes to sort of modifying something into a diet or a diet break, or utilizing like calorie deficit, or all of those strategies that we utilize normally. So I guess that's an amazing thing that I'm so looking forward to see. And I guess all our audience will be looking forward to see that too.
And I want to thank you as well. I'm continually amazed by, I don't know, you have to have triplets to do everything you do. I'm amazed. So yeah, just know that I appreciate how productive and efficient and seemingly everywhere you seem to be.
Oh, thank you so much. All right. Well, Bill, I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on to having a live with us. This has been so informative and amazing, and I can't thank you enough for doing this with us.
Yes, and before we go, I want to also thank everybody that took their time to follow this. I was reading the comments. I couldn't comment on everything, but I really appreciated the positive feedback we were getting throughout the entire thing. So thank you to everybody that took an hour out of your life to listen to this.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. I'll see you very soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.